As God's own people, let us proclaim God's mighty acts. For God has called us out of darkness into marvellous light. Welcome to this week's edition of Coal, Iron, Lime and a bit of gospel. Today's gospel reading mentions a house with many rooms. So I've taken a short drive out to here at Aston Hall. And as well as fitting the gospel, there are of course some royal connotations too, just to keep it topical. Our opening prayer. Risen Lord, be the light that shines upon us, through us and beyond us, that the worship of our hearts might be the worship of our lives, this day and all days. Amen. Aston Hall was one of the last great houses to be built in the Jacobean era. It was designed by John Thorpe and commissioned by the owner Thomas Holt, whose family had lived on this site since the 14th century and would continue to own Aston Hall until 1818. Building started in 1618 during the reign of James I. But building didn't finish until 1635, when Charles I was on the throne. It's certainly a house of many rooms, which fits the gospel reference for today. But also, of course, with the coronation of King Charles III this weekend, I was looking for royal connections too. And King Charles spent a night here. No, not Charles III, King Charles I. It was in October of 1642 that King Charles I spent a night here at Aston Hall. That was just a couple of months after he declared war on parliamentary forces. And he'd been visiting Shrewsbury, trying to raise more men for his army, and was on his way back south towards London. He stayed here at Aston Hall before moving on the next day through Warwickshire. And it was shortly after leaving Aston Hall that his forces were involved in the first major battle of the Civil War at Edge Hill. The following year, 1643, saw Aston Hall itself embroiled in the Civil War. The Holt family were staunch supporters of the king, and Aston Hall was besieged by parliamentary forces. There was a force of some 40 musketeers defending the hall, but even so, they surrendered after 3 days of the siege. That was not before Aston Hall had suffered considerable damage from bombardment by parliamentary forces. Much of that damage was able to be repaired, but one particular piece of damage to the staircase where a cannonball passed through it was left unrepaired. Seemingly, the Holt family wanted to have a lasting memento of their loyalty to the king. The Holt family continued to own Aston Hall for another 2 centuries, until 1818, when it was purchased by James Watt Jr., the son of James Watt, the engineer of steam engine fame. Watt owned the building from 1817 until 1848. We've had one royal connection, let's have another. This time, Queen Victoria. Queen Victoria visited Aston Hall on several occasions, and one of those was in 1858. Now, by that point, Aston Hall had been opened as a commercial enterprise by a company called the Aston Hall and Park Company Limited. They sought to use Aston Hall as a museum and the parkland in which it stood as the People's Park, with free admission for the people of Birmingham. Queen Victoria and Albert came to open the People's Park on the 15th of June, 1858. They didn't stay here at Aston Hall. Instead, they spent 2 nights at Stoneleigh in Warwickshire, at Stoneleigh Abbey. Despite royal support, the Aston Hall and Park Company Limited wasn't a great success, and it failed financially. And in 1864, Aston Hall and its grounds passed into the care and ownership of Birmingham Corporation. And there it remains. Aston Hall and the 52 acres of wonderful parkland that surround it, including this ornate garden in which I'm standing, are owned by Birmingham City Council, and it's cared for by Birmingham Museums. For a modest fee, you can tour the house, but the admission to the grounds and this garden are absolutely free, and I can well recommend a visit. Aston Hall, a house with many rooms.
Jesus said, "Do not let your hearts be troubled. Do not let them be afraid. Believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house there are many places to live. If it were not so, would I have told you that I go and prepare a place for you? And when I go and prepare a place, I will come again and will take you to myself, so that where I am, there you may be also. And you know the way to where I am going." Well, Thomas said to him, "We do not know where you're going. How can we know the way?" And Jesus said to him, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. If you know me, you know the Father also. And you will know him, and you will see him." Philip said to him, "Lord, show us the Father, and we will be satisfied." And Jesus replied, "Have I been with you all this time, Philip, and still you do not know me? If you have seen me, you have seen the Father. How can you say, 'Show us the Father'? Do you not believe that I dwell in the Father, and the Father dwells in me? The words that I say to you, I do not speak on my own, but the Father who dwells in me, he does his works. Believe me, that I am in the Father, and the Father is in me. But if you do not, then believe me for the works themselves. Seriously, those who believe in me will also do the works that I do. In fact, they will do greater works than these, for I am going to the Father. I will do whatever you ask for in my name, so that the Father is glorified in the Son. If in my name you ask me for anything, I will do it."
"In my Father's house there are many rooms" is one of the translations of the beginning of that passage we just heard. And it's only the translation that I read when I was thinking of where to come today, and we ended up here at Aston Hall, a place of many rooms. Incidentally, among those rooms are the great oak staircase, which still has that damage from the Civil War cannonball to see, and also the Long Gallery, which is said to be one of the best examples of a long gallery in an English stately home. Back to that gospel reading. Jesus begins it by saying to his disciples, "Do not let your hearts be troubled." Their hearts would have been greatly troubled, because in the passage that immediately precedes this, in John 13, Jesus has told his disciples again that he is on his way to Jerusalem, where he will die, that one of them will betray him, and that Peter will deny even knowing him. Do not let your hearts be troubled. Very necessary words at a time of great distress for the disciples. He then tells them, believe in God, believe also in me. And in the Greek, there's an and in there. Believe in God and believe in me. And in the discourse that follows, we heard Philip saying to Jesus, Jesus, show us God the Father. And Jesus says, Philip, if you have seen me, then you have seen the Father as well. And then those words about, in my Father's house there are many rooms. Jesus is clearly issuing an invitation and says he is the way, the truth, and the life. He is the doorway. He is the key. He is the guide. He is going ahead to prepare a place for his disciples. But it won't just be for a few. There are many rooms. It's an invitation that all are welcome to accept Jesus as the way, the truth, and the life. To be forgiven of all of their sins and frailties, and to enter into that house in which there are many rooms for all people. For God is love, and God's love is for all. Eternal God, whose Son Jesus Christ is the way, the truth, and the life, grant us to walk in his way, to rejoice in his truth, and to share his risen life, who is alive and reigns, now and forever. Amen. Thank you once again for being part of Coal, Iron, Lime, and a bit of gospel today. On the closing frame of this reflection, you will see a link to the Aston Hall website, where you can find out more details about this fascinating place, and also, if you want to, you can book a ticket on there as well. Beware though, if the villa are at home, there are restrictions about how you can get here. This Villa Park, incidentally, was built on a corner of the estate of Aston Hall. In the week that lies ahead, take care, stay safe, and remember that the best of all, God is with us.